Hey everybody, welcome to the Hour of History podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Bauman, and this week I'm talking to Phil West, the author of The United States of Soccer, MLS, and the Rise of American Soccer Fandom, and I Believe That We Will Win, the path to a U.S. Men's World Cup victory. This hour is jam-packed with information about United States soccer. We talk MLS, we talk the U.S. men's national team, we talk about player development, the future and the past, and a whole lot more. You're definitely going to want to stick around and listen if you're interested in soccer, or if you're interested in the process of writing, in journalism, in going out and seeking answers. Phil has a lot of great stories, and he's certainly had a great career, and he will continue to have one. It was a pleasure to have him on the show. On Hour of History, it's our world, anytime, any place.
You're listening to the Hour of History podcast.
Our world, anytime, any place.
With your host, Stephen Bauman, and producer, James Abel. The Hour of History is a member of Episodic Network, an association of fun, interesting, and informative podcasts. EpisodicNetwork.com. Without further delay, your Hour of History starts right now.
Hello and welcome to Hour of History. This is your host, Stephen Bauman, and with me today I have Phil West. He's the author of two excellent books, The United States of Soccer, MLS, and the Rise of American Soccer Fandom, and I Believe That We Will Win, the path to a U.S. Men's World Cup victory. Welcome, Phil. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
This is sort of the typical way we start off with everyone, but what a cool, job you have, being sort of this historian of the MLS. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into soccer, first of all, and then maybe how it met up with a career?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, calling it career is kind of a stretch. I mean, I did write a couple of books, and each of them took about a year, but it's just kind of part of the mix of things that I do. But yeah, I have parlayed that into being able to write for two soccer publications right now. One, of course, is MLSAustin.com. It's the official website of the league. And then there's another one called Pro Soccer USA, which is the Orlando Sentinel actually puts it out. But it's a big nationwide network. They started last year around this time, and they do really fun coverage as well. So I've been part of that the last probably 6-8 months. I started out filling in for the Dynamo when they didn't have a person in Houston, and now I'm doing some other work as well. I just am wrapping up a story right now about the opening weekend of USL Championship. The comically named version of what used to be USL with 36 teams now, which is incredible, and just kind of how the Southwest is coming on. It's really fun. It's been really interesting. But yeah, to get to your question though, so how I got into soccer, I started pretty young in the 70s, growing up in Seattle, watching NASL. So the Sounders were obviously kind of a big deal. Pele, had just come to the Cosmos around that time. So kind of got a little exposure, kind of got interested to that. Then kind of got cured from soccer kind of immediately around that time playing it. Because when you play in the Pacific Northwest, you get rained on. It was really unpleasant. They would stick me at left back and wouldn't really coach me or anything like that. So I quickly kind of, I had soccer kind of in my back pocket. I was interested, but I didn't pursue it for a while. And then just kind of through the years, I mean, I would say what really kind of rekindled it was the 98 World Cup and following the French team's fortunes in particular. And then just kind of watched it more and more. And then it obviously I was still, kind of catching soccer here and there where I could. 2002 World Cup, watched a lot of that because my now 17-year-old was a baby, and I was doing a lot of bottle feedings at 2 and 3 in the morning. And of course that was the South Korea Japan World Cup, and so there were a lot of games on live at that time. And so obviously that was the thing to gravitate towards, especially when you're holding a baby. So a lot of it was that, and then just through the years got more and more into watching, and eventually writing about it. Eventually, just kind of about 5 years ago, just started in with a blog with some people that I had met, and then just kind of progressively got more and more ambitious in who I decided to write for, and eventually got into the position where I'm at now.
So, Phil, how did you get to actually writing the books?
Well, the first book, The United States of Soccer, was a completely different book at its inception. So, 2014 World Cup, I had this idea that I wanted to travel around the country and see a World Cup game in a different city every day.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So kind of the idea was, chronicle, fan experiences, talk to people, just kind of do that sort of journalism. And so I did that and had some really amazing experiences and ended up like not really doing anything with the material except for kind of anecdotes. But I shopped it to a bunch of different agents. The kind of idea, and I found Lauren Abramo, who was with Distal Goderich up in New York. And so she shopped it around and ended up talking to a group called the Overlook Press. It's a small press out of New York. It's this guy, Peter Meyer, who was this big legend in publishing, had done a lot of amazing things with Penguin, for example, and had this as kind of his niche publishing house. And their editor was like, well, yeah, no, we really like his voice, because I sent some writing samples to and stuff, obviously. We really like his voice, but we think that this book is going to be, obviously dated by the time he could write it. So does he want to write a history of MLS instead? and so Lauren called me and said, well, here's the deal. They're interested, but they want you to write a completely different book from what you drove 10,000 miles and spent a month of your life doing. And it was an incredible experience. I wouldn't have changed it at all. So except I wouldn't have punched the ATM after the US lost when I was in a bar in New Orleans, because I was kicked out of a bar in New Orleans.
Well, haven't we all?
Yeah.
But, and if you haven't, you need to go to New Orleans.
Exactly.
But it is fantastic. Yeah, but so was that a letdown, or was that? I bet you're just as excited to get the offer.
Yeah, no. I've been following the league some, but to actually be given this opportunity here, you're going to do this immersive research project. Some of this, peripherally, some of this, kind of more, acutely, having followed it more the last few years, but this is your opportunity to tell a story and put out a book. And so, yeah, absolutely. So I jumped at it, and it was exhaustive. It was a year of, a lot of different interviews, a lot of research. If you look at it, it's in a way kind of more of a collage than an actual writing project, just because there was so much material in my research that I wanted to bring into the book and piece the story together. And so, I wrote the last 20,000 words of it over Thanksgiving weekend. It was a 4-day weekend before I had to turn it in, and basically went downstairs to baste a turkey like every hour, and then went back up to my writing hovel and wrote.
Wow.
But then the book came out, and people bought it. Some people bought it.
Yeah. And it was no small achievement. You interview basically all of the important people in what's a long history now.
Yeah, there were a lot. Some of them, and some of them were just like the Ken Horowitz thing. It's just like I was reading about the situation and tracked him down, and I was afraid, because here's this guy who had this, notoriously failed franchise, and he though decided, I'll talk to you, and he was very forthcoming and had a lot of really amazing things to say. And to me that was a really key interview for that part of the book. And so what happened after that is, so the book had been out, and then Peter called me out of the blue one day, or he emailed me out of the blue one day, and he said, I've been pondering what it's going to take for the US to win the World Cup, and I'm wondering, would you like to write a book on that? And I'm like, yes, I would. I would love nothing more in my life than to write that book. So, and that was a little bit different, because obviously, the first one, it was history. There was kind of natural places to go in terms of the chapters. And then this one, I felt by that time that I was much more kind of immersed in American soccer culture. So in ways, the book was easier to write because of that. But then also, just not knowing necessarily how to start and how to arrange the chapters and things like that. And so it took a lot more kind of work and interviewing just to kind of get the foundation and just get the outline and figure out like what the chapters were. And Yeah, and some of that, was frustrating. Like U.S. soccer didn't cooperate nearly as much as I thought they would.
Hmm.
So, I really wanted to interview Top Ramos, and he just, for some reason, even though he had talked to me for the first book, didn't want to talk to me for this one. So, but eventually they did have me talk to Jared Miklos, who is the Development Academy person. And so, that was really the kind of one key person that I wanted to talk to from there if I was going to talk to anybody from there. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that was just a little bit puzzling. It's like, look, I'm on your side, and
Yeah.
all that. And then of course, right as I was turning the book in, and again, a lot of the book and its success was predicated on first-time fans wanting to watch the U.S. in the World Cup, 2018. They got knocked out.
Yeah, exactly. What a turn.
And then the other thing that was kind of a weird complication was like January, as I was putting the finishing touches on that, I have a chapter about Latino player development, and basically half the chapter was about there's this kind of showcase that a group does around the country every year, and I talk a lot about that. And Jonathan Gonzalez is a product of that. And this was the time that Jonathan Gonzalez was making his one-time switch from the U.S. to Mexico. So it's like, oh God, here's another change I have to make. And so, I talked to Overlook, and I'm like, look, y'all, I need another 10 days to put this together because this disastrous thing just happened. And they were like, yeah, we understand. So, and then, just kind of sadly, I mean, the book came out, and Peter died shortly after that. So,
Wow.
Again, kind of some of the momentum, for the book in part was, dashed obviously because of the U.S. not making the World Cup, and that was, felt on a large level. But just kind of, personally for me, I mean, here's Peter, this guy who didn't know me from Adam, who championed, not just one but two books, and then he, passed away before I even kind of got the chance to, talk to him about this book, and to find out, did I answer your questions about, can the U.S. win the World Cup? Did you get the stuff that you were seeking for when you commissioned this? And I don't know. I just won't know because he passed away before we could have that conversation.
Wow, that's kind of extraordinary, but I think the result kind of speaks for itself, and a lot of people are reading these books, and if they aren't, they should go check them out.
Yeah, and I mean, my hope, my hope in writing these ultimately is just to help people educate themselves more. And I mean, again, I come at this from a lot of different, with the understanding that the audience is going to have a lot of different perspectives, that there are going to be some people who know a lot of this already, that maybe this is kind of more of, when they read it, kind of more of this recognition, this kind of, oh yeah, this kind of, I'm glad he put this in here, versus other people who maybe don't necessarily have the background, who don't necessarily have this knowledge. I mean, I definitely don't want to speak down to those people because, all of us have been that person at one time. I was certainly that person, at one time where I didn't, know the things that I, quote unquote, should have known.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, I also recognize that there's a lot of people who, are reading this to kind of engage with the kind of lines of thought around this and already maybe have their position settled.
And now you were a writer by training?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. No, I've done. Yeah, I train as a journalist. I actually did a lot of music journalism. I grew up, like I said, in Seattle. And so when all the grunge stuff was going on in the late 80s, when that was first coming on, I was writing for the college paper then, got a fake ID to get into shows, and saw a lot of shows, saw a lot of really amazing, historic early shows. Saw Nirvana when they were first starting out. 30 people in this little theater space in downtown Seattle, Kurt walking around, playing his guitar on the floor during the last song. There was no stage. It was just a bunch of monitors, and they set up a rug and just kind of played right, 5 feet away from us, literally. That was growing up in Seattle. And so I did a lot of music writing, went to LA for an internship, where I did some radio writing, and writing on radio, not writing for the radio. And then got to Austin in '94 and did a lot of arts writing here once I'd finished up in Seattle, and then just eventually found my way to soccer. But no, I've been a journalist active for over 30 years now, which makes me feel really old saying that.
No, but it's a fantastic story. It's an interesting story, and it's kind of unique that that you got into soccer through, soccer was, there's two unique things here, right? The NASL, which, is kind of America's go at this big time world scale soccer, and then also 1998, which most Americans associate with failure.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so you kind of, I mean, you were exposed to two of these like disasters, really. I guess
Right.
NASL wasn't a disaster.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, because obviously, I mean, there's a lot of people who have lived it and, you know, sort of lived and died by it. I mean, it wasn't really till, you know, we failed to make the 2018 World Cup that I had really experienced that kind of soccer-induced heartbreak on a big scale. I mean, of course, I'm an Arsenal fan, so that's kind of happened along. But in terms of like the gut punchiest loss of all in my entire life, it was, yeah, definitely October 17th, October 10th, 2017.
Yeah.
Remember, because that is it's also my wife's 40th birthday. So we're gonna go out right after the game finished, and
oh wow! And
I was kind of in a fetal position on the floor after that. You know?
No, yeah, that certainly
it was really hard, especially with the book coming out. You know, saying I believe that we will win.
Yeah, and you know, it's almost even hard to say the book title without getting into the spirit of the chant. And but before we get into the you know, hopefully we can talk about the first book, the MLS, and then talk a little bit about I Believe We Will Win too. It's going to be a jam-packed hour. But let's just talk a little bit about the difference. You mentioned being an Arsenal follower. How is one an Arsenal follower, or how was one an Arsenal follower back before sort of the establishment of U.S. popular soccer versus how do you follow sports clubs now in Texas?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really become an Arsenal follower per se until they got on TV more. So, I mean, it was about 10 years ago. Yeah, I mean, I know there's obviously people who would kind of flock to pubs where they might have like one game on every 4 or 5 weeks or something like that. But no, this was something that was more of, you know, just I was getting more and more interested in soccer, and you know, a lot of it was predicated on hating Man U. there was a really and you know, obviously being an Henry fan because I was obviously a French fan. I mean, yeah, again, just because I mean, obviously, you know, I'm an American fan through and through, but also my family on my mom's side is from France, and so I've always kind of had them as my second team, and in some cases my first team.
Yeah, and that's kind of a fun one too. That like Americans sort of have that other nations. Well, I think it's changing a little bit now, but you know, every American kind of has their second and third, and you know, the pubs are going wild for England this summer in Philly. That was for certain. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the MLS. So, in this history of the United States of soccer, although the league starts in 1996, you start the book in 1988 with what you call the promise. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the dreams and how the MLS came to be? It took a while.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of that had to do with FIFA. Yeah, I mean, right before FIFA awarded the 94 World Cup to the U.S., the NASL had basically folded. I mean, they were shedding teams, and then it was kind of morphing into an indoor league part of the time. It was really kind of strange in terms of that. But essentially, they just kind of ran out of teams that wanted to play, that could field, you know, a group of players to do a full season. So, you know, obviously, there were a lot of incentives, read money, for FIFA to put the World Cup in the United States, but they were concerned about having no domestic soccer league that would kind of help support that and would kind of bring in fans. I mean, that turned out not to be a problem, of course, because the U.S., I think it's still the best attended World Cup in history, just because, I mean, there were a lot of obviously curious American onlookers, but obviously there were people with, you know, again, nation of immigrants, these affiliations from all over, and plus it was a place for people where they could travel. But FIFA had asked the U.S. to get a domestic league up and running as a condition, as it were, to be awarded the 94 World Cup. And so Alan Rothenberg, who was heading up USSF at that time, you know, kind of had his eye on wanting to do that anyway. And so that definitely provided an incentive and got some folks together. And eventually Mark Abbott, who was someone who had worked with Rothenberg for a while, became the first employee of MLS. And initially they were thinking, oh yeah, let's definitely hop on the kind of bandwagon of World Cup supporters and let's field the team in 95, but they realize we're not going to be ready in 95. We need another year, and we know that we might lose some momentum from the World Cup, but they figured in the long run that would be the better decision. They figured if we have this really short runway and try to get the league up and running in 95, that's going to be problematic. So they held off until 1996 because of that. But obviously there was already, the announcement was made in 1993. There was already obviously a push from various people who were interested in owning teams, interested in being GMs, interested in playing in the league. There was definite eye toward that ramp up towards 1996 that was happening even then before the 94 World Cup started.
And it's all kind of extraordinary that we're talking about the 1990s in the U.S., the United States, having to establish a professional sports league.
Yeah, I know.
It's just extraordinary. And because we have the NFL and MLB, things like that we just sort of kind of imagine we're there forever.
Yeah. And obviously, the NFL, NBA, MLB, they all have these long histories, but they also had these periods. The NBA was in part kind of revived by Magic and Bird. A lot of people argue in the 1980s, there was definitely this kind of weird period in the 70s where there were, kind of concerns about the health of the league. In ways you could argue that, Major League Baseball right now has maybe less relevance than it has in years past. Definitely there are still fans, but in terms of, kind of growing that and reaching, kind of new audiences, I think there definitely has to be probably concerns from people's there. So it's not, and even like the NFL, even though they're this powerhouse, you have obviously the concussion issue and all those kind of concerns there. So you always have these things that are, you don't want to say it's a given to have a sports league, but certainly there's been a lot more, shall we say, demonstrated solvency from those kind of big three leagues as compared to soccer, which, obviously, I think until MLS, obviously, you had leagues coming and going. It was really, really tough for the infrastructure and sponsors and things like that to coalesce and give that the kind of long-term support that it needed.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too to see the development of these leagues and how they can change really significantly in a short period of time. When you look at the initial, sort of rollout of MLS, and this is something I've noticed FIFA likes to do with a number of leagues throughout the globe. Like they tried kick-ins with the Korean soccer league when they started it, rather than throw-ins. But the MLS started with a kind of different game with the countdown clock, and maybe you could talk a little bit about what was behind that. Why change it into a different game?
Well, I think it was to do some things that American audiences were already familiar with, like in obviously in football and basketball and baseball, the clock counts down versus up. So they decided to implement that just so American audiences could have something they're familiar with and recognize. There was this big fear of ties, obviously, so they would break ties by having these kind of hockey-style penalty shootouts where you'd have a player run from 30 yards out and try to chip one past the goalie, which is hilarious. And if you catch YouTube videos of them, they're spectacular. So, but after a few years, when Garber came on as commissioner in '99, a lot of kind of the first thing that he did is he looked and he said, look, we need to be traditional. We need to follow the rest of the world in terms of this. We're doing some stuff that is just kind of silly in the eyes of the rest of the world, which is really funny because, Garber did come from the NFL. In particular, he came from NFL Europe. I think that's where he had gotten a lot of his, kind of traction and a lot of his experience. So, certainly he had experience with bringing a sport from one place where it was really familiar and second nature and part of the zeitgeist to a place where, it wasn't necessarily as familiar.
Now, and Garber's a super important character, sort of, leading the MLS, especially through a significant decline and downturn period. Do you think the reason that the MLS was able to survive was because of sort of that, or was it a combination of the success that the U.S. had in the 2002 World Cup and Garber's sort of leadership? So Garber's an important person in the leadership role in the MLS. As he kind of navigates the league through that downturn that happens in the early 2000s. What sort of combination would you say? Was it Garber's leadership, or was it the success of the World Cup or of 2002?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was all of that. I mean, it was certainly. Well, at the time that Garber came on, there was obviously concerns about attendance, which Logan, who was the original commissioner, had kind of implanted with these sort of lofty sort of projections in terms of how many people would be there. I think he said in the second year, yeah, we can definitely get to 20,000, which was, and Mark Abbott was like, oh yeah, that's just somebody being optimistic. But a lot of people in particular in the book, Kevin Payne, who was the original GM for DC United, who's very forthcoming, very, very interesting interview, a lot of interesting perspectives on soccer. He was just like at the time, oh my God, this is a millstone around our necks. Like every article that is talking about MLS is mentioning the attendance first, right? And you're even seeing a little bit of that now. So certainly there was that. I mean, there was definitely, concerns about the solvency of the league, right? So, and again, in particular, Tampa and Miami were having issues. Tampa was league owed the entire time. Nobody really stepped up to take ownership of that. And then Miami's owner was just sort of flustered, I guess you could say. And I mean, I talked to him in the book too. He had these kind of ideas for what he thought would work, and they just weren't working. And he was, just sort of flummoxed as to why. And so, again, there was the difficult decision to contract the two Florida teams, but that was seen as necessary. Let's do these austerity measures. And then, the success of the 2002 World Cup. I mean, again, it was a weird one to kind of stake your wagon to, because it was in South Korea and Japan, and the broadcast times were, so ridiculous. But at the same time, this is when ESPN was really coming into its own as well. And I think that partnership was really helpful. And then that set the tone for the next one in 2006, where, it's in Germany. They're going to be really friendly times. It's going to be really easy to do a broadcast there. And that whole arrangement between U.S. Soccer and MLS and the creation of some Soccer United marketing, which still exists today. I mean, that's been a huge part of why I think MLS has persisted and has been so successful, that a lot of the revenue generated from those TV rights to the World Cup, have been absolutely instrumental in keeping the league afloat and solvent and growing.
Yeah, and it is kind of interesting to see the interest, or the world continues to get smaller and even more connected, even though it was still really connected in the 90s,
Right.
But the sort of growth of global soccer just really takes off in the thousands. But for the MLS, would you say it is this sort of shared financial with the TV, or is the real turning point when the MLS starts to attract players like David Beckham?
Well, Beckham, I think Beckham certainly helped. I mean, again, having a player of that stature coming along at that time, that definitely got a lot of attention toward the league. Toward MLS, and I think that's continued, and I think there was certainly a phase of that. But like today, even now, with players like Tyler Adams going over to Germany from MLS, players like Miguel Almiron, who was so good at Atlanta United in their first two seasons, and now is turning heads at Newcastle. I mean, there's definitely, I think, interest in what MLS was, kind of first as this curiosity, as this kind of way station for these aging known European players, but now as this burgeoning selling league, a place where you see young talent, where, you may see kind of European soccer fans look at MLS in the same way that, maybe we look at college basketball, right? Or at least college basketball before, the one and done rule has kind of ruined it, right? But these places where you see these players develop and grow and then get to the next level. I mean, I think if MLS can kind of firmly ensconce itself in the next 5 years as one of these major leagues where players develop and get ready for play in England, play in Germany, play in Italy, play in Spain, I think they'd be really happy. I think that would be exactly the sort of thing that they would want to be, and then get up to a next level, get it to be where players in their prime that are world class definitely want to be.
And then in that sense, do you think the summer schedule is actually doing the MLS a favor, like sort of giving the European fans something to watch?
I mean, maybe a little bit. Yeah, I didn't even really thought about it that way. I mean, because there are a lot of people who say, yeah, we need to get on the European calendar. But then again, we had the game in Colorado last week where it was 8 degrees. And that, that's kind of evidence that, yeah, maybe we don't need to do that necessarily. Yeah, I mean, I think that in part. I mean, I think also, obviously for European fans, it's kind of late night stuff, but yeah, I mean, it's the same kind of experience that we can have. Like last Saturday as a soccer fan, it was just so glorious. I mean, it was, essentially kind of 16, 17 hours where there was a game on where, I had some sort of vested interest, right? So either as a fan of the Premier League or fan of the Bundesliga, or just watching the slate of MLS games. I mean, last 2 weekends, I guess you could say was.
And then you throw in the Champions League competitions, and it really never stops.
Yeah, exactly. And then plus the talk of doing another, kind of continental Copa America, or not continental, but hemispheric, right, where you have North and South America together in 2020, like we did in 2016, which was a really, really fun tournament, actually. And yeah, I got to cover, I got to go to the Houston games. I did a little bit of writing on that, but essentially it was just, kind of taking it in. It was, I mean, tremendous just to be, on that level and to see, I mean, to see a international tournament, 3 hours from where I live, it's a pretty easy drive that I make, and seeing Messi destroy us with a free kick. I mean, that was very hard, obviously, but at the same time, just kind of miraculous that, wow, this is where soccer's getting to in the country, where we have this tournament, it's full of American fans going nuts, and then, we're also seeing, oh, here's us against Argentina, and this is a perfect storm, and this shows like kind of on a bad day just where we are in comparison to the competition.
Yeah, and this is kind of interesting. I mean, you've sort of done the work for me as you're blending in from the MLS to talking about the national team.
Yeah.
Which is it's totally a linked conversation.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And definitely, I think, I mean, obviously there's been this kind of assumption kind of early on, and this was kind of a lot of the pressure for, players like, DeMarcus Beasley and Landon Donovan, who did a lot of their really good work in MLS, but still this pressure to go to Europe because that's where real players get tested. And this is kind of a lot of what I talked about, in my second book, is that for some players, MLS is a really great place to develop. They get minutes, they get a level of competition now, especially with the players coming into the league, where it's really helpful. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, because MLS, has definitely helped American players, but one of the points that I was making to people in the run-up to 2018 is, it's not as easy anymore because you have these top players from Honduras and Costa Rica who are able to play, in MLS, and they're able to get, quality minutes here, and they are quality minutes now. So, obviously it's a good training ground for Americans, but it's a good training ground for a lot of other people as well, right?
Yeah, it's improved the whole region, and what's also kind of amazing is that it's also put those players on the radar for the rest of the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you look at Almiron. I mean, you look at, Luciano Acosta. I don't know quite what happened with the whole PSG interest and the not interest, but at the same time, I mean, you have this pretty mammoth European club that's in the Champions League pretty much every year going after, a DC United player that not that many people knew like 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And so as far as the United States development goes, you talk a lot about MLS academies and U.S. soccer development academies. Can you talk a little bit about those and sort of what you see those doing for American soccer?
Yeah, I mean, one of the, and I get into this a lot in I Believe, but one of the big concerns obviously is the money and the pay to play situation, right? So one thing that development academies do is that they take talented players and basically foot the bill for them, right? So once you get into those academies, you don't have to worry so much about what happens at that youth club soccer level. That you can just kind of focus on developing with professional coaches. And when it's done really well, like say, like at an FC Dallas academy, you have, or like the Red Bulls academy, I mean, you have these players that are coming out of there that are able to play at an elite level, because those players have been found and those players have been developed in really good, really nurturing conditions. Again, just with FC Dallas, I mean, I thought it was so interesting that when Pareja moved on, that Luchi Gonzalez, who I did an interview with him kind of using Kellyn Acosta as a test case. And he went through all the kind of measures that they use to say, is a player going to make it or not? And it's not talent. Like everybody who's there has talent. But there's all these sorts of, intangibles and all these sorts of things about, your intelligence and your character and your makeup. And he had, I definitely encourage people to, if you're going to get the book and you're interested in the future of American soccer, just for that section, because the way that he lays it out and the steps that he talks about, I just found absolutely so intriguing. And now he's FC Dallas's coach, and he looks like he's going to be one of the more intriguing coaches in the league. And it looks like they're definitely going to be one of the more fun teams to watch.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. And who is in charge of these? Why is there such a gap between, say, the Red Bulls Academy and others in the league?
It just, part of it is the talent that comes into your particular club. It's regional. I think they're talking about possibly changing that and just making kind of a free-for-all. But a lot of it right now is just kind of based on what geographic area you're in. And then, some are kind of strange. I think, like, I want to say like Hawaii is either like Seattle or Real Salt Lake, like Hawaiian talent, but it's what you would expect, right? It would be like, the Galaxy, now LAFC, basically split up Southern California. It's, Dallas has a lot of, the Metroplex and a lot of North Texas, although, it's weird. They don't have Oklahoma. I think that's like Sporting Kansas City that has Oklahoma, even though there's a lot of, in other sports, switches between Texas and Oklahoma players. And even though FC Dallas's USL affiliate is in Oklahoma City. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of strange. But they, and some clubs just really prioritize it. Some clubs just really find it to be an important pipeline for talent, and other clubs, they maintain them, but they have successes doing other things. I mean, I think, ultimately you have a club that is helping to subsidize player talent. And the thing is, it doesn't quite reach everybody, but it does reach those players who have been identified as potential national team players. And then you have the union doing really interesting stuff where, they have a program where even like, kind of 5 and 6 year olds are getting into their system. And they're not training with the first team, obviously, but they have it comprehensively reaching to that level. And you see a lot of really interesting young players that they're developing right now. In terms of like how they're going to pan out, it's kind of hard to say, but definitely, you see this kind of generation of Union Academy players who are coming up and being asked to be the backbone for an MLS team.
And so what is it like for these kids? If you're like a 5 or 6 year old kid, where do you get noticed and how do you join into the academy? How does that sort of thing work?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it still depends on scouting. It still depends on that club system, and there's not the number of scouts per player that there are, say, in Germany or Spain or France, which is part of the issue, right? So I mean, again, that's part of the thing with those countries is that they've been at it longer. They have a smaller area to scout. They have more people that are in the role of scouting and coaching. The book talks about that a little bit as well, right? So that America is, or the U.S. rather, is kind of at this disadvantage compared to other countries, but it's also something they're conscious of and something that they're trying to address. So it's not just, we're going to be stubborn and we're going to do it this way we've always done it. It's still a matter of, yeah, okay, we want to get better. We're seeing what's happening in other countries. We're really trying to motivate ourselves to learn and to get better and to improve our systems. And, I think the formation of the DA in particular over I want to say that was maybe like 10 years ago when they started, that was an attempt to, essentially try to streamline and make the youth academy systems better. Mm-hmm. But again, it's a massive country, and yeah, to get noticed, some kids will be phenoms and they'll get noticed, but other kids have to go through this pipeline still where it requires a lot of money in order to have that happen.
And you're hopeful about the United States, and yeah, and no, well, but not a lot of people are, but I see the cynicism is starting to sort of fade away. Like maybe 10 or 15 years ago, it was like kind of cool to hate the MLS and just American soccer and so on, but that is fading very quickly. You mentioned this sort of like, Americans want to win, and you look at the Olympics and USA has to be at the top. There's just this enormous competition. You look at women's soccer, and this just record of winning. And you think that the U.S. men's soccer team could be there, and you think it might be 2026? Can you tie that in for us?
Yeah, well, I think 2026 is a kind of perfect storm because, again, we are hosting because a lot of the players who are really coming on are going to be in their primes, right? Again, it's amazing like how young these players are going to be. Players like, Kristen Pulisic and Weston McKennie and Tyler Adams, who we're still hearing about, they're going to be on, kind of the happy side of 30 still when they get to that World Cup. So, and with Berhalter as a coach, I think that's an interesting choice. I think he's got a good system. I think he's probably the right person for it right now. We'll have to kind of see how it pans out. I know that a lot of soccer fans were kind of wringing their hands about this quote unquote lost year when Sarkhan was the interim coach right after we missed out on the 2018 World Cup. I think there's a lot of things that will happen. I don't know that we'll win outright, say in 2026, but could we, get to a semifinals? Could we, threaten to get into a finals? I don't think that that's out of the realm of possibilities at all. Host countries tend to do pretty well in World Cups, and given the level of talent, if we can have that team be cohesive on the field and figure out who are the right people in the system to excel, then yeah, certainly I think obviously it's going to take some luck, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities. I would say that there are probably 15 to 20 countries right now that could win a World Cup in any given cycle, and I would put the U.S. in that group.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting. Only so few have ever won the World Cup, right?
Yeah.
I think the number is 8 total, and so it's like. There's some sort of magic to it anyway, but we also don't know. The 2026 World Cup, we're talking about people who are potentially 12 to 15 right now who could be playing in that World Cup.
Sure. Yeah. That's the thing. We have, now with this academy system and with these academies being a little bit more established, it's not, the Barcelona Academy necessarily in terms of, stature, history, or anything like that. But, it's not like they've just opened up either. So there's definitely some figuring out that has happened during this time frame. And yeah, maybe some of these players who are developing in that system are, going to excel and do well. Yeah. And the other thing too is just, again, you look at a player like Josh Sargent, who was through the club system, who didn't get MLS Academy trained, but is doing really well right now in Germany, playing for Werder Bremen. You will still have some players like that who might bypass MLS, find homes in Bundesliga. And Bundesliga, if you get in the right situation, is a place where you can develop, right? Mm-hmm. So, it's a place where, you're definitely going to get world-class competition. Obviously, Germans are really good at soccer, and a lot of the other people who play in the Bundesliga are really good in soccer. There's a lot of international players that find that as a home. And yeah, I think you look at, McKinney's had kind of a weird journey with what Schalke's asked him to do, but I think that there's certainly things that he's learning there that are helpful. I think Sargent, his development's coming along nicely. I think Adams at Leipzig, his development's coming along really nicely. So, and these are good places. These are good key pieces to have on that team. So, if that continues to be successful and they continue to develop and grow as they have over the last few years, they're gonna be really solid players by the time that 2026 qualifying and the World Cup roll around.
And how do you see the NCAA and college soccer in relation to all of this?
Frankly, it's less and less relevant, because a lot of the players who are in that age range are already aspiring to, head out to, an MLS club or overseas. They'd be playing in Europe. Yeah, I mean, certainly there are some good players that can still be found through the college system that develop there. I mean, you have like a Jordan Morris, for example, who did that pretty recently at Stanford. But I think especially with USL's growth too, as the second division. I mean, it's now up to 36 teams. So, I think if you are an 18 to 21-year-old and you're wanting to develop as a soccer player first and foremost, I think that you're better served by, even USL maybe than most college teams that you'll play on.
Now, I think those are all good points, and it's kind of interesting. I did an episode about the history of hockey, and hockey's almost worked in this way in Canada, mm-hmm. where it eventually made university hockey just irrelevant.
Right.
What do you think, though, a sort of a unique aspect of the United States challenge is geography? Historians love geography. And
mm-hmm.
Just recently, in fact, Houston made a tweet saying that their journey to Monterrey for the CONCACAF game is actually one of their closer journeys of the season. Do you think the sort of geography of the United States actually hurts it, or...
Yeah, I mean it's a big place. Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of just fandom. I mean, certainly. I mean, a lot of the United States of soccer. I mean, it talks about fandom and it talks about the importance of again, especially with the early league. I mean, a lot of how those groups were able to travel from city to city. That they were able to get from New York to DC to Boston to Philly, and that there was this kind of growth that was happening with those groups in part because of that proximity. I mean, I think was super helpful.
And you talk quite a lot about fandom. And how that kind of built up the MLS as well. So explain a little bit about that, please. Yeah, so like the point I was gonna make on that though is that I mean with the early development of the league, I mean obviously when you had those cities that were in close proximity to one another, you could have those kind of cultural things happen. But it's been kind of like a tougher road to hoe for some of those places like Seattle and Portland that were isolated. I mean they certainly got an interesting rivalry going together, but obviously that's been this kind of isolated corner of the nation, and in other places, I mean, it is harder to travel. I mean, it's not like England where you just hop on a train and you're in a completely different part of the country in 2 hours. So I do think that is challenging, and certainly I think in terms of finding and developing talent, it is a lot harder to navigate the country. But I mean, again, obviously, there's I think there's really interesting diversity, and I think there's really interesting regional things that happen. And I think that, again, if you think of the U.S. as, kind of group of mini nations, then, you have something that can be, really kind of amazing and powerful. And as for these, the fan groups, and especially like, since you're on the ground level of Austin, which is getting its new team, are you noticing sort of a different genesis in Austin from the other supporters groups that you've studied and followed?
I mean, a little bit, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. The guy who founded the group originally in 2013. So he was a Union fan. He was part of the Sons of Ben. And was living in New York and then came here. So, I mean, there's definitely, and I think especially with TV and I think especially with the internet, there's been a lot easier capability to share and have conversations and things like that. I mean, obviously in 1996 when the league started, I mean, a lot of the reasons that I think the fan culture was able to grow was that a lot of them were participating in what was then, before American Outlaws, Sam's Army. And you had this kind of shared American fandom, and a lot of that was shared through that. And that's still, I think, really instrumental in terms of how fans grow, that there is this kind of network, that you have a guy like, Donald One, for example, who's one of the main capos and one of the main organizers. And he's also a DC United fan. A lot of what he's learned has come from being in Screaming Eagles. But then also there's information and knowledge that he's been able to pass on from his time in AO, and then other supporters for other MLS teams get that. So, so I think now, I mean, it's not like Austin is being created in this bubble, right? It's, Austin is, again, it's, fans have gone to Houston games. They've gone to Dallas games. They've seen a lot of games on TV. They've communicated with fans from all over, especially Columbus fans, as it turns out. And so I think there's an understanding of how to do it, right? So, but also, one thing I'm noticing about Austin is that there's also things that are happening within kind of Austin culture and within that kind of keeping Austin weird, that is going to make Austin a unique group as well. Like there's a lot of kind of national scorn, you could say, for at the Austin launch. One of the chants was 7-4, which is not a score. It was actually the vote that allowed partner for the stadium to be built here. And for a lot of people, it's like, oh my God, that's ridiculous. It's a political vote. What does that have to do with soccer? But it also kind of represented this point where, there had been a lot of kind of NIMBY action in the past where, major sports alliances with the city, like building stadiums and things like that, were shut down. There was this kind of prohibitive protectionist sort of quality. And that vote was a symbol, because the mayor was very, very into bringing the soccer team here and has been very much a champion of that. Yeah. And so that vote was kind of just a representation of, we've turned a corner. We're going to embrace sports. Sports is part of our culture, and soccer is the sport that we've chosen. And plus, a lot of those fans were at council meetings that would go until like 3 or 4 in the morning, literally. Like, and soccer would be the last thing on the docket. So it's not just you're debating about soccer for 7 hours. It's like, no, you're watching people debate about land use issues and, do I get a license to operate a ambulance company in Austin for like 6 hours, and then you get to debate soccer for 1 hour.
Yeah, and it's kind of while you're talking about this, I was in New York City when New York City FC was first emerging, and
right.
It's interesting as well to see how their fan base has kind of dealt with the stadium issue from scorn to embracing it, even sort of disagreements between the supporters group. About the supporters group, though, the league has changed so drastically. It's no longer the sort of days where you could go to RFK or Spartan Stadium, even in San Jose, and just roll up and be in the first row with 100 other supporters. Now, management is getting involved with supporters groups at a pretty high level. How do you think that's going to change?
Well, how do you mean exactly?
Well, I mean, so like recently with DC United opening the new stadium, and having the 3 supporters groups, kind of I guess the management's idea was to put it into one. And there's been similar disagreements across the league. Do you think that will change, or do you think that's ultimately like sort of making these groups more official and might actually help them?
I think that's situational. I mean, I think there's not kind of one relationship between fans and supporters groups. So, I mean, in some cases, yeah, like with DC, I know that there was some kind of weirdness because they were perceived to be privileging Screaming Eagles over the other 2 supporter groups, Barra Brava and District Ultras, I think. Yeah. So that, in that case, that became kind of questioning motives, and that kind of, I think, engendered a lot more suspicion than maybe they had wanted to. But with like LAFC, for example, they have a bunch of different supporters groups who are all in one place, but the team, and I'd done an MLS story about this a couple years ago, which is I think probably one of my prouder stories. And it just basically talked about the partnership that the team had with the supporters. They basically said, okay, this is going to be your place. We're relying on you for this kind of support. What do you want in your supporter section? And basically the team and the architects and the supporters group sat down and they hashed it out. And I feel like, for example, with an Austin FC, I mean, I know that the front office has been having a lot of communication with the supporters. So I feel like it would be kind of more of an LAFC type style model than what, DC kind of experienced. And then Houston a few years ago, I mean, they decided to move their supporters up into an upper deck. And, they went along with it. And it was interesting, like at the time they had 3 different supporters groups that had, kind of definite, kind of distinct different identities who were being asked to all be in one place. And what happened is that now El Batallon, which is the Barra Brava style supporters, so they're, kind of South American influence. They have, the drums and the trumpets, and they do these kind of just impressive, like 10, 11, 12-minute songs at a stretch. Like they do this version of Wonderwall, like every time. So you hear these like really familiar, notes from this Oasis song, but it's done in trumpet. So, and you're like, what is that? That's Wonderwall. They're playing Wonderwall, and everybody has this experience on Twitter, and it's like, yeah, they do this every game, all that. But that's become kind of the dominant. That's become kind of the dominant fan group experience. I mean, Texian Army is still there. They still unveil their black, orange, and white Texas flag after every goal. But in terms of setting the tone, in terms of what people experience when they go to a game or what they experience on TV, it's that music from that upper deck. So I think that's something that they've made work, but at the same time, would that be more impactful if they move that down to the lower section? And would there be conversations about that in the future? Again, it's just, it really varies in terms of kind of the front office and what their aims are. And if it's a good symbiotic relationship that they have with the supporters, or whether it's more adversarial. Because supporters groups will kind of, no matter what, talk about their independence, right? That they don't have, that they don't have things that are scripted from the front office. Like they create their own tifo, they do their own chants, they set their own policies. Certainly they have to do some stuff in partnership with the club. They have to certainly kind of make arrangements with the front office to be there. But there's an authenticity that comes with that. If you were a front office and you were trying to dictate what a supporters group did, or if you tried to import your own supporters group into a place, it would be rejected. It couldn't happen. I mean, it needs to be vital and to be, kind of truly the voice of the fans. I mean, there needs to be that divide there still. There needs to be that sort of independence that the supporters group has, even though you can have really good partnerships. So. Right.
And so peering into the future a little bit, a debate that, I'm sure you're sick of, but it's just probably the most frequent debate online, talking about MLS and promotion and relegation.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, but it would be irresponsible if I didn't let you at least say a couple words about it.
Yeah. And I'm like the biggest pro-rel skeptic, I think, out there. So I don't see what the threat of being kicked down to, say, USL and playing in 5,000 to 10,000 seat stadiums. I don't see what that does necessarily to motivate a player. I don't see what that does necessarily to make a team kind of truly better. I mean, what's happened in Britain a lot too is that, people have been relegated and there's this kind of balloon payment to make the team better to get back up. And, owners just haven't done it,
exactly. And then they keep sinking and sinking.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think in theory, I mean, the competition is interesting, and, again, just kind of the, that's a part of me really enjoys teams being relegated, like in Britain.
Yeah.
But it's a part of me that I don't really like. So, there's kind of a weird like kind of Schadenfreude I think maybe that comes up. If it's like say like a Sunderland or something like that, where or if it's like a Stoke. I think like when as an Arsenal fan when Stoke got relegated, I never thought them injuring Aaron Ramsey. So it's like, oh well, that's nice. I'm glad to see them go down. But and it's kind of fun to see which new teams come up. But I don't think that works in the US where you have, a definite distinct tier between 20 to 70,000 seat stadiums in MLS, and then you have something much less than that in the other leagues.
Mm-hmm.
It works in Britain in part because they've built their own stadiums over time and they've developed this fandom over a century. So, if Newcastle gets relegated, you're still going to have 45,000 people going to St. James Park or however many it is, and you're not going to have like this huge drop off in experience. You'll have these kind of, there's going to be obviously, the bigger Premier League clubs with major stadiums, but there's not going to be as much sort of distinct divides between, a team that might be getting relegated, and a team that stays up in 15th or 16th place.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it also, I just don't know. With pro rel, you can have this really dangerous kind of like haves or have-nots sort of dynamic that takes place as well. And I don't think that pro rel necessarily, fixes that, which. It's kind of predicated on this idea that you elevate or get bumped down based on merit, but I just don't think it works like that. The thing that I love, I think maybe most about MLS is that things are just so unpredictable from year to year.
Mm-hmm.
You have playoffs, and if you had a pro rel system, I think you would have a haves and have-nots system emerge, and I think that you would have some clubs that would get relegated who would maybe never get back to MLS, and that would be, I think, really damaging for a league that is still relatively so young.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so you've now given us a sort of history of the MLS. Something baseball has that I don't know any other sport has. Some baseball teams anyway have club historians. And you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that you got your start just writing on a blog. Do you have a suggestion for people who are interested in the history of their club? See what they've got on their website, and if they don't have things on their website, obviously, trying to, if you really have an interest in the history of your team, certainly kind of carving out a niche for yourself as somebody writing about that. Yeah, like MLS there's a guy, Rick Laws, who I actually talked to when I first started the project, and he functions as sort of the MLS historian. He's based in Pittsburgh, but he'll do a lot of things like, media guides at the MLS All-Star Game and things like that. So, and he's somebody who grew up with it. He was in DC in the mid-90s, and he was talking about the whole kind of secret society, people getting the British soccer magazines at Tuesday or Wednesday, coming over from London to DC in their bookstores, and there's like 3 pubs that they would coalesce at that would have games, or they'd watch Soccer Made in Germany, half-hour highlight show, Bundesliga highlights, and so there was, so he's somebody who's definitely lived it. But absolutely. Now, especially, with avenues like SB Nation and things like that, there's definitely avenues for, if you are, someone who can write and doesn't mind writing for free for a while, to develop a voice writing about soccer, and to just kind of understand the rhythms and cycles of how it works. What is breaking news? What are more, in-depth, useful think pieces? What are, kind of interesting pitches versus, what are, kind of maybe, tired sort of takes on things. I think that's, there's definitely avenues that you can, I think, either make for yourself or, take advantage of. There's not the gatekeepers that there were, even 10 or 15 years ago with
just kind of the incredibleness of what's happened on the internet.
That's awesome. Yeah, hopefully people will be inspired to take your advice on that. We also have now, as we near the end
I've told people to write for free.
Yeah. well, but I mean, are you not a living testament that it does work if you have the skill and you persist? But you had an enormous amount of training.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it takes, it takes a lot, it takes gumption. And, in my case, it took like about, 25 years of journalism experience before I got started, down this particular road. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's, I think if nothing else, being able to participate as a voice within soccer of somebody who, cares, and is somebody who cares enough to be educated about it and study it and practice it, and again, especially, I mean, a lot of people in soccer talk about this a lot, but just the importance of having diverse voices, of having more women, of having more people of color writing in there. I mean, that's definitely something important. And again, especially, if you are a woman who is interested in soccer, or you are a person of color who's interested in soccer, by all means, yes, we need you out there writing and bringing your perspectives into things and sharing those, just to make things more diverse, and just to have that sort of participation within the community. I mean, that's definitely something that we like to see more of. Unusual Efforts, for example. I don't know if you've run across that, but that's a soccer website that does really good work, really, really smart work, and it's all women who write that.
That's Unusual Efforts.
Yeah, and that's kind of their whole purpose is yes, we want to have more women writing about soccer, and here's a platform to do that. And they do great work.
That's an excellent suggestion. It's dangerously close to a suggestion, but I'll still let you make a suggestion in addition to that one. I'll certainly link to Unusual Efforts. But
okay.
Do you have a suggestion for us, Phil?
I mean, I always kind of try to do a musical suggestion because
Awesome.
Obviously having grown up in Seattle, obviously music was kind of a big part of that culture and was kind of my first love in terms of writing. There's this amazing new band out of London. I guess, well, they're not so new. I think this is like their second full album that's just come out. They're called Snapped Ankles, which is named after what Kathy Bates did in Misery, apparently. And it's an album called Stunning Luxury. So, but it's kind of like if Earth Firsters became Devo. So they do a lot of things about like kind of ecology and dealing with just kind of the modern world encroaching on nature. They wear these ghillie suits, which are kind of like these large kind of shaggy suits and like antlers on their heads, and have these kind of vintage synthesizers that they build into like logs and things like that, and bang the logs with sticks, in addition to just kind of being, kind of like maybe, kind of old school new wave, but kind of also with a sort of edge to it. And they're just weird and wonderful. And this station KEXP that I listen to a lot, that I used to work at ages ago, back when it was the University of Washington student station. They do a thing every year called International Clash Day. Which was a holiday that they just invented for the Clash. I actually went to London this year, and Snapped Ankles was one of the acts, and they did live streaming of the show, and it was just amazing. I mean, first, just the music was like so weird, and you have all these cultural references that you can kind of put your fingers on, but at the same time, it's, they're wearing these weird shaggy suits with antlers, and they're banging logs with sticks. It's just super weird. But just the audience shots were so great. Just this delight and amusement and awe, like kind of all blended at once. And anytime you have a band that can kind of bring that out in people, it's definitely, it might not be your cup of tea, but definitely worth investigating.
No, that's an awesome suggestion, and in fact, it's made me change my suggestion. I had one prepped and I had one in mind, but I'm gonna change it to something that a lot of people, I think, don't want to do because they're tentative or nervous or scared or whatever. But karaoke. And you can start in like the Korean style noraebang, the karaoke rooms where it's just you and your friends. That might be a good entry point for people who are uncomfortable with it.
Sure. Yeah.
But you work your way up, and I think everyone should do it I don't like singing in front of people. I'd much rather talk, but man, is karaoke fun.
Yeah, there's a place by our house, like Austin. You guys might have this. Wait, where are you? Where do you live?
I'm in DC.
You're in DC. Do you guys have Alamo Drafthouse there?
I don't actually know. I just moved here.
Okay. It's this chain of movie theaters that started here, and essentially they started out, with here you can have a beer and get food while you watch a movie, but they're like total movie connoisseurs, and they've created this new theater that has this downstairs kind of bar area called Barrel of Fun. And they have like family karaoke every month.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's a blast. It's so much fun. Yeah. And my daughter, who's 19 months old now, is, beginning to kind of get, the sense of, hey, I can be up on stage and, bang on things. We'll enjoy watching that. So,
which is what we all need. That's excellent.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. The hour has gone by very fast.
Really has. Thank you.
Yeah. Good to have you. That's Phil West, and Hour of History. It's our world, anytime, any place. So long.
Thanks again for listening. Make sure to check out hourofhistory.com/Rex for all the recommendations mentioned during the show. That's hourofhistory.com/RECS. And if you still haven't gotten your fill of the Hour of History, be sure to head over to our blog at hourofhistory.com/blog, where you'll find topics that were covered in the podcast as well as others. And that concludes this week's episode. We thank you again for listening, and we hope to have you back here next week at the Hour of History podcast.
Hey there, Hour of History podcast listeners. Have you seen our website, hourofhistory.com? It has some excellent content that has aged very well. Discussions about places such as Syria, North Korea, and the United States. Still relevant today, even though the podcast was recorded nearly a year ago. Check out hourofhistory.com and scroll for a bit. Stay for a while, and you won't regret it. On Hour of History, it's our world, anytime, any place.